Good evening and welcome to the Fall 2022 Fellows presentation. I'm Daniel Benjamin and I am the president of the American Academy, and it is a pleasure to welcome you tonight as we introduce our 49th class of fellows. And looking out over this wonderful assemblage of fellows and guests, it is worth noting that a time traveler from, say, 1998, when we had our first class, would wonder why all these elegantly clad individuals have ugly cloths on their face. And to that, I can only respond in the words of the great American comedian Billy Crystal: "You look marvelous." It is great to have something like our pre-pandemic full house here together again. And we know that you never step into the same river twice, and that life after the shutdowns of the last 2 years is bound to look different than it did before, and we don't exactly know what the future will look like, what our protocols will be, or what the health conditions will be. But as we move into the fall, I am just so thrilled to see such a large crowd, have probably 75, 80 people here. And I really appreciate that you are enduring the masks to help ensure that we are as well protected as possible. So with that out of the way, I would like to welcome our trustees. There's one of them who's finding a seat right now, Volker Schlondorf. Take a bow, Volker. Christina Wallich is here. Hans-Michael Giesen is there, and tonight Wolfgang Ischinger, who is joining us as our speaker, and who I am proud to say is also a trustee. The Academy is fortunate to have a truly great board, and I want to thank all of them for ensuring that our doors are open and for doing the hard work to make it possible for our fellows to have the best imaginable setting to do their work. Are we able to order coffee in the front row now? Okay, great. So it's not only the fellows who have really comfortable things. Now, I was told that the ambassador from Greece was coming. Is she indeed here? Well, I can't welcome her then, although she is an old friend with whom I worked years ago, but I look forward to seeing her again. We also should have several people from the U.S. Embassy. Are they here? Yes, wonderful. Great, thank you so much for coming. Are you Sherry?
I am, and I come bearing greetings from another ambassador who wishes to greet you, and our own ambassador, Ambassador Gutman.
Oh, wonderful. Well, welcome. We've emailed before, but it's nice to see you in person. Thank you so much for coming. And last but most importantly, I'd like to welcome the 10 outstanding scholars and writers of the Fall 2022 class of Academy Fellows, as well as their partners and children. We are thrilled to have you all here with us at the American Academy. I know not all of the children are here, but I think we have a total of 9 in residence. This may be an Academy record. We'll have to go deep into the archives to check on that. That is almost Fußballmannschaft. And this certainly promises to be a fun and lively semester. I'm delighted they're here. Liveliness, not only in children, but even more so among fellows, is really what the American Academy is all about. And when they set about establishing the Academy in 1994, Richard Holbrooke and founding chairman Henry Kissinger, Richard von Weizsäcker, and Thomas Farmer aimed to create a place of learning and creativity, an institution where the members would probe what we have in common, how we differ, what really matters, and where we should go in the future as societies closely allied and as core members of a global community. They wanted an institution where meaningful intellectual exchange between Americans and Germans could take place across a wide, even vast array of disciplines in the humanities, in the social sciences, visual arts, music, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, journalism, law and policy, to name just some of them. And they wanted a place where these discussions laid the groundwork for ties across the ocean that would endure. Holbrook and his co-conspirators were extraordinarily fortunate to find partners in Stephen and Anna Maria Kellen, who joined them in establishing this institution here in the house that Anna Maria and her sister Ellen had grown up in. This lovely villa had also been a place of liveliness, of art, and serious discussion when it was the home of Anna Maria's parents, Hans and Ludmila Arnold, during the Weimar era. Their descendants, I'm happy to say, remain the strongest supporters of the Academy to this very day. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that one of their descendants, a beloved trustee of ours, Nina von Malzahn, passed away just this summer, and we will celebrate her life tomorrow here at the Academy. But it was Nina who supported this particular event twice a year for many years. As we begin our 49th semester, it's worth pointing out that the kind of exchange the Academy's founders envisioned is more important now than perhaps at any time since we opened our doors. The once unthinkable, a war of conquest in Europe, continues just a day's drive from here. And while the galvanizing of the transatlantic alliance has been an unexpected and indeed great development, the uncertainties about European security, democracy on both our continents, and the restructuring of the world order because of China's rise and the resurgence of authoritarianism means that even if we are not talking about NATO or events around Kharkiv, we must talk more and more intensively about all the values we share, the issues that concern us, and the common civilization that we have inherited. Whether we're talking about the mechanics of our democracies, music and how it will help us face a future of global challenges, or how the interpretation of Herodotus in the 19th century shaped our understanding of East and West today, it all matters vitally. Those are the subjects of 4 of our Berlin Prize Fellows, and the work of their classmates is equally critical. So this is an evening of introductions. Our tradition at the Academy is to invite an outstanding Berliner to welcome fellows to the German capital. The fellows respond by previewing the scholarly artistic work that they will be doing here while in residence at the Hans Arnold Center. And you may consider this, the latter part at least, a bit of intellectual speed dating, but we believe it will whet the city's appetite for more engagement and discussion. That's someone calling now for more discussion. So let me now turn to our keynote speaker. One wonders why one would need to introduce Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger. Wherever I go in Germany, I'm told that, yes, my interlocutors know this or that one of our trustees, but they all know Wolfgang Ischinger. And they have heard him speak, they have read his latest article, they may have brought him on board as an advisor to their firm or toward their organization, but they all know him and admire him. And that is fitting for Germany's most eminent diplomat of the last 3 or 4 decades. Wolfgang's career is the one that every ambitious German diplomat measures him or herself against. He has had more extraordinary jobs than you could shake a stick at, as Groucho Marx used to say. He was head of the German Foreign Office's policy planning staff. He was political director, ambassador to the U.S. in one of the most challenging periods of our relationship, state secretary and ambassador to the Court of St. James. I think he did that all before he was like 35, too. Since his retirement from the Foreign Office, Wolfgang's achievements have been just as impressive. Above all, he turned the Munich Security Conference into a juggernaut that I know from personal conversations aroused the envy of Americans who are used to trying to create juggernauts of that sort. It has a vast array of events beyond the annual meeting in Munich, which has become the must-attend for everyone in the foreign policy and defense world. He recently stepped down from the chairmanship of MSC, but he remains the president of the organization's Foundation Council. He teaches at the Hertie School here in Berlin and at the University of Tübingen. He advises numerous private sector, organizations and firms, governments, international organizations, you name it. I'll be available afterward to give you even more of the list of the things that Wolfgang does. But it is really extraordinary. Of course, the greatest of all of his many credentials is that he has been a board member of the American Academy since 2009, when he was dragooned into this by Richard Holbrooke, like so many good people who went before him. Anyway, I could continue and talk more about Wolfgang, but what I really want to do is give the floor to you. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you very much, Dan. Your eloquent presentation of my credentials reminds me of the way Dr. Kissinger, one of the founders of this institution, usually responded when he was introduced in this kind of overly friendly fashion. He would say, "I wish my mother was here. She would actually have believed every word of it." Thank you for having me. It's a privilege, and I want to welcome, as you just did, all the new fellows and distinguished visitors and guests, and of course the friends of the Academy. This is a wonderful place, and I don't want to interfere with the program which is supposed to allow all of the fellows to talk for a few minutes about the reason why they're here and what they plan to do during their stay. But let me start by making just a few brief comments about how I see this. In diplomacy, which is my profession, one of the most difficult tasks is to correctly understand what it is that you believe you see or you are hearing, interpreting it in the correct manner. This is harder than most people think, because most people prefer talking to listening. And one of the principal tasks of the diplomat is actually to shut up and listen, and to try to understand what's going on between the lines, and what are the things that are not being said, and why. So the best story that underlines this belief of mine that it's very difficult to understand correctly what we see is the story about Pope Benedict. Remember, German Pope, who actually is still alive. And the story goes like this. He was from Rome invited to come to his old hometown of Munich for an official visit, and after the conclusion of this visit, his next stop was going to be the city of Stuttgart, 2 hours away by car. So they put him into a brand new 12-cylinder 7 Series BMW, and the young driver went to the Autobahn, and off they went. At which point, Pope Benedict leaned forward and said, "Young man, I'm sure you are not aware of this, but when I was still the Archbishop here in this town of Munich, I used to drive my own little Volkswagen. And in Rome, they don't actually let me drive at all. And I know that I will never, ever have a chance to drive a 12-cylinder 7 Series BMW. So would you mind switching places?" The young man, who was probably a young Catholic man, said, "Your Holiness, of course." So he stopped at the next parking spot on the Autobahn, and the Pope got behind the wheel, and the young man didn't really know what exactly he should do, so he got into the back seat. And the Pope went off, and it took about 15 minutes until he was stopped for speeding by the Bavarian state police. And the policeman who approached the car, according to protocol, from behind and looked into the car, and then he looked again and decided to call his chief in Munich. And he said, "Chief, we've just stopped this guy. He was speeding. I mean, we have it on the radar protocol, no doubt about it, 35 kilometers too fast. But, Chief, my sense is that this is some kind of a VIP situation. And the question is, should I give him a ticket, yes or no?" Chief says, "Young man, you must have missed, police academy training. In Bavaria, everybody is equal before the law, so I don't give a damn who this person is. Give him a ticket if he was speeding." Hangs up. Young man looks into the car once more, thinks about it for a moment, then he calls the chief again and says, "Chief, I'm really sorry for bothering you with this, but I really think this is a VIP situation." So the chief says, "Well, who the hell is the guy in the car?" And the young man says, "Well, Chief, that's the problem. I don't know who that is, but what I do know is his driver is the Pope." So much, I hope you get the point, so much about, correctly interpreting what you believe you see with your own eyes or what you believe you're hearing, and interpreting and understanding that correctly is not so easy. Richard Holbrooke and his patron saint, Dr. Kissinger and Tom Farmer, etc., understood absolutely correctly what they saw. In the good old days of the Cold War, when we had regularly hundreds of thousands of American soldiers at all levels in West Germany, we took pride in the fact, and I remember when I was a young diplomat in Washington in the early 80s, we took pride in the fact that we said, Germany has literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of former American soldiers serving in Germany who are now back home in Alabama or in Texas or in upstate New York, who have nice stories to tell about Germany. So they are literally many hundreds of thousands of, unpaid German ambassadors. And what better idea, what better thing to have? I mean, it's on automatic pilot, it works. And Holbrooke and his friends, after 1990, after the breakdown of the Soviet Union, after the U.S. had correctly decided to reduce the U.S. military presence in this country massively, Richard Holbrooke and his friends decided that we're going to lose this ability, the Germans are going to lose this ability to have hundreds of thousands of unpaid ambassadors in the U.S., but we in the U.S. will lose the ability to connect in this massive way with Germany, with German elites, with the people of Berlin, most importantly, etc. And that was one of, not the only one, but one of the original thoughts that gave birth to this institution. And I want to really pay tribute to those who've made it happen, not only as a thought project, as a political project, but who also helped do it financially, etc. You mentioned the families, the Kellen and Arnold families, and a number of others who have contributed. So this is a wonderful institution, and I've been very proud to serve as one of the trustees for a number of years. And I look forward to hearing from the this year's fellows about their program. Let me conclude by just saying a word or two about the relationship between Germany and the United States going forward. as a very personal remark. But I think many of my fellow Germans here would probably want to agree with me. Even if we've had serious disappointments in this relationship during the Donald Trump presidency, serious doubts about the reliability of the United States as the supreme protector in nuclear and other terms, the United States has never been a more important partner to this country than is the case today. This is the first time that I remember, and all of you will remember, first time we have a war in Europe which directly involves one of the nuclear superpowers. I actively participated as a diplomat with Richard Holbrooke, by the way, who led this effort, trying to end the war in the Balkans, the Bosnian War, the Kosovo War. These were actually extremely bloody wars with hundreds of thousands of casualties. But they did not involve the kinds of strategic challenges that we're now facing with the Russian Federation and its Führer at the helm, who is without a controlling parliament, who is without even a Politburo, as was the case with the old Soviet Union, who is the one person who runs this huge country. So this is an extremely dangerous situation for us. And I wonder where we would be as Europeans if we had not had, at the beginning, at the outbreak of this, a president in the White House who would actually be able to find Kiev on the map, even if no one showed him where it is. I'm not convinced that all Germans would find Kiev on the map. And I'm not convinced that all Germans know that from Vienna, the border of Ukraine is nearer than the Bodensee, the city of Bregenz, for example, which is the westernmost tip of Austria. So we're talking about a country that is in the heart of Europe. And we're talking about a situation that our chancellor has called a Zeitenwende, meaning that not all, but many of our most fundamental foreign policy beliefs of the last several decades have gone out the window. For example, the dogma that my entire generation had no choice but to believe in, that it was not going to be a good idea to ever deliver weapons to an area of conflict. Now we're doing the opposite. We are actually delivering weapons to an area of conflict, which is the wise and the right thing and the necessary thing to do. So what I want to say is, if we did not have the US as our transatlantic partner, continuing to offer, at least in the nuclear sphere, the protective umbrella, I don't know where this war would be today and where we would be. So we need this relationship, even if Germany has grown up, even if we've been able to enlarge NATO massively, even if we're going now to have Sweden and Finland joining the NATO alliance, etc., etc. So I think this institution is not only not losing its original vocation, its original purpose. This original purpose is growing even more important going forward as we face a situation where increasingly our interests are going to be interfered with by great power rivalries, thinking of China, thinking of Russia, thinking of Chinese-US difficulties, etc. So we need the closest possible transatlantic relation. And I'm very happy to say that this institution, the American Academy in Berlin, is a wonderful pillar on which to continue to build this relationship, not only in terms of political, but also in terms of social, intellectual, academic relations. So on this happy note, I think I've been told that I should now, if that's okay with you, I should now offer the floor to the first of the class of 2022 fellows in my list. That would be Claudia Rankine of New York University. Claudia, floor is yours.
Good evening. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be here. And if I look beyond you, it's very beautiful out there in the water. I am a professor of creating writing at NYU in New York, and I am also the fellow. The Der Epen Fellow, which is exciting to me because of all that he's done in terms of publishing and journalism, which is something that interests me as a side job. But what I'm going to be working on here is a conversation that happened in 1983 between James Baldwin and Audre Lorde. Audre Lorde spent quite a lot of time in Berlin. The conversation happened 2 years before Baldwin died, and a year after Audre Lorde was diagnosed with cancer. And this is relevant. Why? Because both of them were looking at the possibility of their own death, and so consequently felt they should say everything. And while I'm here, I'm condensing that conversation and hopefully performing it for you, and then also writing a hybrid introduction to it that looks at what it means to be powerless with agency. So, thank you.
Demasking. Hello, everybody. My name is Alex Redding. I'm a professor of music at Harvard University, and this semester I'm also the Anna Maria Kellen Fellow here at the American Academy in Berlin. And it's a great pleasure and a privilege to be here. And you're right, the view is really rather stunning. My project has an immodest ambition. I want to examine how music can help solve the problem of climate change. And if this sounds startling to you, then that's entirely intentional. It appears perhaps unseemly to put together one thing that is of great seriousness with another thing that we generally associate with leisure activities and entertainment. But if we take a step back, then perhaps it's not quite as startling anymore. Because if we think about this as music and nature, then there is in fact a long tradition that really goes back to Orpheus taming wild animals with his beautiful music, or Beethoven finding inspiration in his natural surroundings. Except in our time, nature has come to mean something rather different. The news every day tells us about new catastrophes, floods in Pakistan, wildfires in the American West, or melting ice caps. The situation requires a wholly new approach to thinking about nature, and soon. One of the pernicious aspects of climate change is that it's difficult to pin down. It's diffuse. If I drive my SUV to work this Tuesday, or my 12-cylinder BMW, that does not cause climate change in itself. But if millions of people do the same thing every day, over years, the cumulative effect has a devastating effect on the planet. And that means, on the one hand, we need to change course right now But on the other hand, the consequences of our actions will not be noticeable until much later, often decades or centuries. Climate change operates in many timescales at once. It's a problem of temporality. And that's something that music is actually quite good at. As an art form that exists in time, music can articulate a distinct sense of now, just as it can project into the future. The kinds of music that are interesting here are unusual kinds of music. Some of the experimental pieces that I'm going to work with can last many, many years. Some have not been heard and won't be heard until sometime into the future. And other pieces may only be sounded one single time. But one thing rings out very clearly from all of them. Humanity has a chance of survival if we learn how to listen. Thank you.
I want to thank everyone for this wonderful honor to be the John P. Birkeland Fellow at the Berlin Academy. I'm Jackie Murray. I'm a professor of classics and African American studies at the University of Kentucky and University of SUNY Buffalo. And I work on primarily classical literature, classical philosophy, but I also teach African American history, particularly slavery, and African and Afro-Caribbean literature's receptions of classics. So the project that I'll be working on here is on the image and idea of slavery in Plato, his dialogues. It's a joint project that I'm working with my colleague / next door neighbor, who's a philosopher, and we're looking at the ways in which Plato's dialogues are littered with references to slavery, but has never actually been studied in a systematic way. We're starting off with looking at Phaedo and the Republic, and that's what I'll be working on here, 2 chapters. The first chapter will focus on the Phaedo, and I picked the Phaedo because that's what triggered our idea. In the Phaedo, Socrates refers to the idea, or compares the idea of suicide to escaping slavery from a good master. And this disturbed us, the idea that there could be such a thing as a good master of slaves. And as we look more into the idea, we find that there's a lot of references to slavery directly in Plato, where there are slaves figured, such as the Meno, where he actually specifically talks about slavery in the Laws and in the Republic. And in the Phaedo, the narrator was once a slave and was freed. And most people don't really realize that. And this puts an interesting frame on the whole discussion that the soul is enslaved to the body, or that the body should be enslaved to the soul, which is the kind of argument that Socrates is making. And so while I'm here, I hope to explore this topic, trying to see if Plato does have the possibility of thinking outside of the box, and is slavery the only model he has for the human existence, as he's telling it in the Phaedo. And so I welcome you all to come to hear my talk about it.
Hello, good evening. My name is Ying Zhang. I'm so honored to be here as one of the Nina Maria Garrison Fellow in History at the American Academy in Berlin this semester. Back in the United States, I'm an associate professor of pre-modern Chinese history at Ohio State University. At the Academy this semester, I'm hoping to complete a the first draft of the first book in English on pre-modern Chinese prison culture. This book examines the use of jailing as an administrative legal procedure during the Ming Dynasty, which existed from mid-14th century to 17th century. So the Ming Dynasty is like China today, has been a dilemma. And we know about the massive export of blue and white ceramics to every corner of the world. And the first curator, I just learned, the founding curators of the State Library in Berlin actually started learning Chinese in the late Ming Dynasty. At the same time, the general public and scholars, they look at the history of politics and bureaucracy of the Ming Dynasty to look for reasons why China didn't take the leap to develop the Western-style modernity. They attribute this to the inherent problems of Chinese culture. So in my book, I hope to, I'm one of the few Ming historians in the United States now. American scholars in Ming history makes uniquely rich contribution to the study of the Ming Dynasty. And I really hope I can use my scholarship to challenge the misunderstandings of Ming history, especially the relationship between Confucian culture and the bureaucratic practice, and really hope to help solve the dilemma of the Ming, or at least explain or demystify Ming China, especially in terms of the connection between its culture and bureaucracy. And another important dimension of my work as a pre-modern China specialist is to integrate and make contributions to the global and comparative prison studies as such a very, very important topic in the United States today. I hope to study the history of imprisonment as family history, thereby illuminating the suffering and hardship caused by the confinement of individuals on families, communities, and society as a whole. I really hope to participate in the conversation in the United States about how we can best understand and explain the impacts of the confinement of individuals on society in a time of mass incarceration, and what we can to imagine collectively what we can do about this. An example of my research will be presented in early November here in my lecture on the meaning of religious freedom in the particular context I study. Thank you so much.
Hello, good evening. It's wonderful to be here, really wonderful to be in person with so many people. What a great treat this is. My name is Suzanne Marshand, and I'm honored to be the other Nina Maria Gurison Fellow in History this fall at the American Academy. Ordinarily, I teach European intellectual history at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, where there is a great deal more Germanophilia than you perhaps might imagine, owing exactly to this tradition of service in the South. And in fact, the guy who checked my bags to come here spoke to me in German. I have written books about the history of classical scholarship and the history of Oriental scholarship, and as it happens, the history of the German porcelain industry. But my project here deals with a bit of both, well, not the porcelain, but my hope is to write a reception history of the ancient Greek historian Herodotus in Europe and America since about 1500. This is a story that has not been written, and it's a lot more complicated, it turns out, than the story of Herodotus' critic Thucydides, which is essentially a straight line from Hobbes to international relations today. The story indeed turns out to be a lot stranger and more relevant, however, than it seems. In recounting the great deeds of both the Persians and the Greeks and the reasons they fought, Herodotus wrote something of a world history of all the cultures known to the Greeks of his time, based on a wide variety of sources, including oral information gleaned from native informants, and plenty of jokes, and he would have loved the Pope story. That would have been front and central in his account. By no means does the histories include a straightforward or entirely rational or complementary history of the Greeks. Herodotus' view of causality, in fact, included the conviction that people do the wackiest things for no good reason, and that too much power and pride will in the end be punished by that scariest of goddesses, Nemesis, the goddess of inevitable retribution. In the histories, as in the Bible, one could find almost anything from descriptions of the behavior of Egyptian crocodiles to the tales of Leonidas and the 300 at Thermopylae. And since the text's reintroduction into the West in the 1470s, European readers have found almost everything in it. So there are two or possibly three aspects of the story I want to bring out. The first is to show that the West's first secular history by no means offers a stable, unambiguous, and fully reliable account of our origins. While Herodotus was invoked by Whigs, defenders of empire, and American Cold Warriors to shore up a narrative of the clash of Europe and the Orient, Christian conservatives, Afrocentrists, and contemporary classicists have read the text in ways that wholly undermine the story. Western readers have never found the same thing in his text, and its constant rereading in the light of new political and social developments has made possible an ongoing debate about what Europe is, where it begins, and how much it owes to or shares with the rest of the world. The second thing I'd like to do in this project is to reflect on the question of the historical truth. Since antiquity, Herodotus has been known as both the father of history and the father of lies. No one could simply throw Herodotus away. His information about ancient Persian politics and Scythian ethnography was just too unique and valuable, and his stories about Amazon queens and flying snakes just too much fun. But which parts of Herodotus could be trusted? Centuries of scholars have pondered this, and in the process have developed a huge arsenal of fact-checking techniques. It has actually been generative, I will argue, to have a father of history who has also been accused of being the father of lies. And the final thing I think I want to bring out of my Herodotus story is to ask the question, why can't history be a little more fun? Thucydides criticized Herodotus for his too lighthearted, too unserious pursuit of the past. One wonders if it isn't time to perhaps reverse some of that operation and give us a little more levity in all of our lives. Thank you.
Hello. I'm actually going to drink the water. So. My name is Alexandra Shaita. I am Mellon Bridge Assistant Professor of International Literary and Cultural Studies at Tufts University in Boston, and the Mary Ellen von der Heyden Fellow in Fiction this fall at the Academy. And I don't usually sound like I spent all weekend partying in Mitte, which actually didn't happen. So I'll try to be brief. So in my work, both as a literary scholar and as a novelist, I'm really interested in the politics and poetics of estrangement, of how we can slowly or sometimes quite quickly become strangers to ourselves, in our own skin, in our languages, and in our homes. And my project here at the Academy this semester is a novel in Arabic and a podcast in English titled Sweetmeats. So the story of Sweetmeats begins with this retired wedding singer who lives in a border town on the border between Lebanon and Syria at the cusp of the Syrian revolution, just before the revolution started to morph into the civil war, and we had this huge wave of refugees coming to Europe and to places including Germany. So what happens with this person is that she goes to her sister's house one day. She goes to the basement, and in this basement, she finds a dead body. And she tries to understand what happened, who put this body there. There's so many reasons why it could have made its way there, but she suspects her sister's involvement, and she decides to get rid of the body herself. And as she does that, she crosses paths with a trans reporter who's in the area, and with a migrant worker from Ethiopia. And together they travel across the country trying to find ways to, basically, the best place to bury it. So with this project, what I'm trying to do is, first, I'm working between various media to try to understand how media can sensationalize narratives of otherness and refuge. And as for the story, I'm really trying to think through the affects of anger and violence. What are they really? What's the relationship between anger and violence? What can they achieve in the world? So in this novel, each of the characters discovers in their own way this deep, explosive well of violence deep within them that had been buried there for generations, sometimes years, but mainly generations. And the question that I'm trying to ask is, can violence be generative? Can it really, other than an act of just destruction, can it achieve something new, something positive? How are we doing? Can I keep going? All right. So I'm finishing this project, and I'm hoping to start working on my next novel, which is a novel in English. And it's about two queer families who discover that their donor-conceived children are actually related to one another. And I am really trying to understand through this novel the meaning of kinship and the ways in which there's this tension between choosing your own family, which is a really big thing in queer families and non-normative families, and kind of sharing this hereditary intimacy with people who are essentially strangers to you. My talk is going to be in late November. Please come to my talk.
Well, thank you all for coming. My name is Josh Sellers. I'm a law professor at Arizona State, and I'm honored to be the Mercedes-Benz Fellow this fall. That is, number one, very easy to remember, which is nice, and pronounce for those of us who don't speak German. And there's also a rumor circulating that the Mercedes-Benz Fellow will be gifted a Mercedes-Benz. And I can neither confirm or deny whether I'm the source of that rumor, but in all seriousness, thank you very much to Mercedes-Benz for the sponsorship. So if, as John Dewey once wrote, democracy is a mode of associated living, then there's reason to worry about the health of our democracy. As is apparent, our associations are under severe strain, political leadership is wanting, and as a scholar of American election law, I have great concern about the cascading political and social crises that we're seeing at home. As I wrestle with these crises, I'm particularly interested in how election law as an academic field can aid in strengthening democratic institutions and improving democratic accountability. And in forthcoming work that I will discuss here at the Academy next month, I advocate for an interdisciplinary research program oriented around the concept of electoral adequacy. The premise of electoral adequacy is that states are obligated to provide a baseline level of election services to all voters. This research program goes beyond the narrow, largely theoretical, or rights-based accounts of voting typically adopted by legal scholars. By contrast to those accounts, the task here is for scholars to identify precisely and through empirical study what types of election reforms are most likely to succeed and satisfy a standard of adequacy that can then inform both litigation and state lawmaking. As an example, consider the issue of polling place wait times. President Obama's Commission on Election Administration set a target of having no voter wait for more than 30 minutes while at a polling site, a standard that most jurisdictions satisfy. Yet, according to one study, minorities are 3 times as likely to wait longer than 30 minutes and 6 times as likely to wait more than 60 minutes. Are these disparities caused by differential election funding, discriminatory polling place closures, ineffective poll worker training? My point is that we don't know, and that's precisely the type of questions that we in the election law field should be asking to push for reforms. So that's one project, and again, that will be the focus of my talk next month. I just want to briefly mention a longer-term project that I'm also working on here on election law and racial equity. And as brief background to that project, researchers really at the cutting edge are just starting to unpack the relationship between election law, whether voting structures or redistricting maps, and some of the downstream effects in particularly black and brown communities, so socioeconomic disparities, health disparities, things of that nature. And so part of what I'm doing here is exploring various data sets to get a better sense of how we can further that research. So when we discuss election law, we have a stronger sense of what the downstream social and economic implications are as well. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Alma Steingart. I'm an assistant professor of history at Columbia University, and I'm the Berthold Leibinger Fellow here in the Academy this fall. My research looked not so much on the history of enfranchisement, the access to voting, but rather what happens after we vote, how our votes get counted. This is a history of the meaning, often the contested meaning, of representative democracy in the United States over the 20th century. In particular, my interest is in the way in which sometimes what appear as technical problems are in fact deeply, deeply political ones. So perhaps the best example of it, and one that's often on people's mind these days, is the history of redistricting. The Reapportionment Revolution is this moment in the 1960s when the Supreme Court rules that malapportionment cases in the United States are justiciable, meaning that the courts can intervene. They shouldn't just leave it to the political process. And in reaction to this, a lot of states have to suddenly redraw their maps, their national and both the congressional maps, districting maps. And this reapportionment revolution, this is how it was described by political scientists at the time, is of course happening at a time in another and simultaneous revolution in the United States, which is the civil rights movements in the 1960s. But I would want to say that there's another third revolution that happened in the 1960s that's important if you want to understand this history, and that's the computer science revolution, or the computer revolution. The 1960s is exactly the moment when computers are getting a little bit smaller. They're still big by our, today's standards, but they're becoming smaller. And as importantly, they are moving out of the military. They are moving into research institute. They're moving into industry. And it's exactly at that moment that researchers, mathematicians, computer scientists, political scientists are turning to computers to ask, what can we do? How can we use this new tool to solve the problem of redistricting? They have different ideas, they have different approaches, but almost all of them are shared the opinion and the belief that the reason to use the computer is because it will offer an objective tool. It will allow them to solve a part of the redistricting that is computational, mathematical, and then kind of handed into the politician. Now, fast forward to today, the problem of gerrymandering today seems to be deeply rooted exactly in the same technology. It's exactly the increase in computing technologies over the past few years that enable state legislative to create thousands of maps, and not just to create thousands of maps, to create thousands of maps that they can then predict pretty accurately what sort of election results they will have. Now, when I look at the 1960s, I'm an historian, so I look back at the 1960s researchers, and what becomes pretty clear across their different approaches is that all of them share the belief that somehow the mathematical or the kind of computational aspect of redistricting can be abstracted. It can be isolated out of the political realm. They really believe that if you can just solve the computational, if you can solve the mathematical problem, and only then give it back to the politicians. But part of what my research shows is that, in fact, this is never possible. It was never possible at a time, and it's not possible today. The mathematical and the political are too entangled and cannot truly be separated. And I think this is important because it reminds us that there are no technocratic solutions. This is not to say that there are no solutions, but this will require a much longer talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll only need a couple hours of your time. I thought I'd just go for the talk that I'm supposed to give in December, just do it now. and save my 3 minutes for then. I am improbably the 12-cylinder 7 Series BMW Fellow here at the American Academy. Sorry, Josh. In reality, my name is David Troyer. I'm the Holtzbrink Fellow. I'm very, very happy, very honored and humbled to be here. And in my civilian life, I am a professor of English at the University of Southern California. Additionally, and this, it feels like it bears mentioning, I'm also the son of an Austrian Holocaust survivor, and also the son of an American Indian judge. And so my parents' gifts to me have mingled uncomfortably inside of me because on one hand, the United States saved my father's life. And on the other hand, the United States did its best to put my mother and my people in the ground. And so I grew up slightly conflicted, less able, perhaps, than some to enjoy and to feel comfortable in the country of my birth. And that's become increasingly difficult for me. America has come to be, at least for me and to my thinking, a much more complicated place than it has been, potentially a more violent place than it has ever been. And so my project, such as it is, and you're going to get it right now, 2 hours worth, is called The Savage Mind, an essay on American violence. And it's a very personal project for me. As I've lost my ability to feel comfortable in my own country, I've lost a sense of myself and my place in that country. And so The Savage Mind, the title of this project, the project I'll be working on while I'm here, is an essay in the truest sense of the word, an inspection of what is American violence, what is its texture, how does it function, where does it erupt, how does it act, how am I a participant in it, how am I implicated in it, and how can we individually and collectively heal and free ourselves from it. So that's what I'm working on. I will save it for December, but please come. So thank you.
Hello. I am all that stands between you and alcoholic beverages. So I will be very brief. I am Mary Serrati. I am the Axel Springer Fellow, and I am really thrilled and grateful to the Academy for bringing me back to Berlin, meine Lieblingsstadt. We were all asked, as fellows, to describe our work in under 3 minutes. So let's see if I can do that. The most important thing to know about me professionally is that I was studying abroad in West Berlin in 1989. And all of the research questions that I've been pursuing ever since then have, in one way or another, come out of the experience of that year, an experience I suspect many of you in the room also shared. I wrote a first book called Dealing with the Devil about conceptual attempts to punch holes in the Berlin Wall to create bad relations between the two Germanys, where previously there had been no relations, in the interest of getting political prisoners out. I did another book on the fraught process of the German military resuming its role in European security and defense, which is, of course, a very current question now. And I then unintentionally wrote a trilogy of books. I didn't know I was writing a trilogy when I started, but it just kept going, on how and why the Berlin Wall opened, called The Collapse, a book on how and why Germany unified in 329 days, a process that many people in this room took part in personally, including Ambassador Ischinger, and thank you for honoring us with your opening today. And most recently, I published a book called Not 1 Inch, America, Russia, and the Making of Post-Cold War Stalemate, about the fight between America and Russia over NATO expansion and where the limits of NATO should be and whether that should include Ukraine or not. And I had a surreal experience after publishing that book last fall. I published it in November, and shortly after that, Vladimir Putin started saying not 1 inch in deranged press conferences, and then, of course, began committing unspeakable acts in Ukraine. So I'm grateful that the Academy is going to give me time here to do a new project on German-Russian relations and the very elusive goal of Western partnership with Russia. And if you'd like to hear more about that, please come back next week on September 21st. Thank you.
Is that the last one? Okay, I'm just making absolutely sure. Oh, nice to take the mask off again. Well, if there was any question about the intellectual vitality of life at the Academy, I think that's all been put to rest. Thank you so much to this year's class for giving us some great glimpses into your works, and I think we saw enough wit on display that I think it's going to be an absolutely fabulous semester. I wanted to also just talk very briefly. I talked about the intellectual vitality. I want to make one quick announcement about another form of vitality. I wanted to announce that the Academy has received a gift of $2.4 million to establish an endowed fellowship in Jewish studies, which I think is going to be a great addition to our academic life. The press release went out today. The donor it actually is someone well known to you, Wolfgang Strauss, who has been a really important figure in German-Jewish relations for many, many years. She is the former director of the Leo Baeck Institute. Our first fellow, Carol Kahn Strauss fellow, will be here, we hope, in 23-24. So that is a great addition to our activities. Let me also say, while I am here, that the next event that the Academy will be doing, I have to look up the exact title again because we didn't put it in my papers, The American Republic, Past, Present, and Future, which will be delivered by Professor Annette Gordon-Reed, who is here with us tonight. And that will be on Thursday. Professor Gordon-Reed teaches at Harvard in the law school and in the history department and is renowned for her work on Thomas Jefferson and his family. So just let me say on the way out, please take a program if you don't already have one. And please do come back early and often, as they say about voting in Chicago, I think. We will continue to stream our events this semester, so if it gets a little too crowded in here, you can watch it at home. I think streaming is one of the interesting gifts to post-pandemic life because it has allowed us to reach audiences that we never expected and to spread our renown a little bit. So anyway, thank you all so much for coming. I think after this evening, I'm fairly confident I'll be seeing some of you again at the various fellows' presentations and at the rich offerings of distinguished fellows we have coming to the Academy. It's so great to see you, and the view is still pretty good.